I paid for everything she has. My mother-in-law snapped across the courtroom, her voice sharp and accusing. She's just been living off us for years like some kind of parasite. The words hung in the air like poison. I sat perfectly still at the defendant's table, my hands folded in my lap, watching her perform for the judge. Her name was Barbara Hutchinson, and she'd perfected the art of looking respectable and concerned while destroying people with lies. She wore a conservative navy suit, pearls at her throat, her gray hair styled perfectly. She looked like everyone's ideal grandmother, not someone capable of such calculated cruelty. We supported her and our son throughout their entire marriage, Barbara continued, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. We paid their mortgage, their bills, everything. And now she has the audacity to claim she's entitled to marital assets? She contributed nothing. My attorney, a sharp woman named Veronica, placed a calming hand on my arm as I tensed. We'd prepared for this exact moment. Barbara had no idea what was coming. No idea that every word she spoke was digging her deeper into a hole she'd never climb out of. Gasps echoed through the small courtroom. Several people in the gallery leaned forward, their expressions a mixture of shock and judgment. I felt my chest tighten painfully, heat flooding my face despite my determination to remain calm. Even the judge, an older man named Judge Patterson, raised an eyebrow and looked directly at me, his expression unreadable. This was the moment Barbara had orchestrated perfectly. Maximum humiliation, maximum damage to my credibility. She'd told this lie so many times to family and friends that she probably believed it herself by now. Her husband Harold sat beside her nodding solemnly, backing up every word. My soon-to-be ex-husband, their son Wesley, sat on their side of the courtroom, staring at his hands, saying nothing in my defense. The people in the gallery whispered to each other. I recognized some of them, family members, mutual friends, people who'd heard Barbara's version of events for months now. They looked at me like I was exactly what she'd called me. A parasite, a freeloader, someone who'd manipulated their way into a comfortable life. The shame tried to overwhelm me, tried to make me small. But I held on to what I knew was true. I had proof, documentation, evidence that would shatter every lie Barbara had told. That was when my entire life almost got completely rewritten by lies. When the narrative Barbara had been carefully constructing for years nearly became the official record. If I hadn't been meticulous, if I hadn't kept every receipt and bank statement, if I hadn't documented everything despite feeling paranoid for doing so, her version would have become the truth in the eyes of the law. I would have walked away from my marriage with nothing, labeled as a gold digger and a fraud, while the Hutchinsons kept everything I'd actually paid for. But I had been meticulous. I'd learned early in my marriage that the Hutchinsons rewrote history to suit their needs, that they remembered events differently depending on what benefited them most. So I'd started keeping records, quietly and carefully, not because I planned for divorce, but because I needed to know the truth myself. Those records sat in a leather folder on the table in front of Veronica, organized chronologically, cross-referenced, highlighted. 5 years of financial documentation that told a completely different story than the one Barbara was selling to the courtroom. I took a slow, deep breath and waited. Barbara was still talking, still performing, still confident. She had no idea her performance was about to be utterly destroyed. My name is Olivia Turner, and I'm 33 years old. I work as a senior accountant at a regional healthcare company, a job I'd worked incredibly hard to achieve. I'd put myself through college while working full-time, graduated with honors, and built a solid career based on competence and reliability. The Hutchinsons had no idea what I'd prepared for this moment because they'd never actually paid attention to what I did or who I was. To them, I was simply the woman who'd married their son, someone to be controlled and shaped into their ideal daughter-in-law. They'd never bothered to learn that my job involved managing complex financial systems, that I understood documentation and evidence, that I knew exactly how to build an irrefutable case. I'd met Wesley Hutchinson 7 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue. He'd been charming, attentive, funny. We'd dated for 2 years before getting married, and during that time, his parents had seemed welcoming enough. But the moment the wedding was over, everything changed. The mask came off, and I saw the Hutchinson family for what they really were. controlling, manipulative, and obsessed with maintaining appearances while rewriting reality to suit their narrative. And now, sitting in this courtroom, I was finally going to expose the truth. I married Wesley, believing we were building a future together, a partnership based on mutual support and shared goals. I'd been naive and optimistic, seeing what I wanted to see rather than the warning signs that were clearly visible. Wesley had proposed on a beach at sunset, a romantic gesture that felt like the beginning of a fairy tale. We'd planned a modest wedding, wanting to save money for a house, but Barbara had insisted on something appropriate for the family, which meant expensive and showy. She'd controlled every detail: the venue, the flowers, the guest list, even my dress selection. "You'll want to look back on this and be proud," she'd told me when I'd suggested something simpler. "Trust me, dear, I know what's best." I should have recognized that statement as the foundation of our entire relationship. Barbara always knew what was best, or so she claimed. She always had opinions about our lives, our choices, our future. And Wesley, trained since childhood to defer to his mother's judgment, rarely contradicted her. The wedding cost $40,000. Barbara made sure everyone knew she'd paid for it, though she never mentioned that I'd covered the rehearsal dinner, the honeymoon, and several other expenses she'd conveniently forgotten. From day one of our marriage, Wesley's parents controlled everything that mattered: our money, our holidays, even our major life decisions. They had opinions about where we should live, what kind of car we should drive, when we should have children, what jobs we should pursue. Every family dinner became an opportunity for them to offer advice that was really just instructions we were expected to follow. Harold, Wesley's father, was a retired insurance executive who'd done well for himself financially. He reminded everyone of this fact constantly, using his financial success as justification for why his opinions should carry more weight than anyone else's. Barbara had never worked outside the home, but she'd perfected the role of family matriarch, ruling over holidays and family gatherings with an iron fist wrapped in polite smiles. "We're just trying to help you kids get started," Harold would say, usually right before making some decision about our lives without consulting us. "We have experience, we know how things work." When I'd suggested we didn't need their input on every decision, Barbara's response had been swift and cutting. "How ungrateful," she'd said, her voice cold. "We're only trying to ensure you don't make mistakes we can prevent." Wesley never defended me during these moments. He'd just shrug apologetically later and say, "That's just how they are." They offered support constantly, but it always came with strings attached, invisible threads that bound us to their expectations and control. When we needed furniture for our apartment, Barbara insisted on buying it, but only furniture she selected, in styles she approved of. When Wesley's car broke down, Harold offered to help with a new one, but only if it was the model he thought was most practical, purchased from a dealer he knew. Every gift, every offer of help, came with conditions and expectations. "We bought you that couch," Barbara would remind me months later when I wanted to rearrange our living room. "I think it looks best where it is." "That car we helped with," Harold would say when Wesley mentioned wanting to trade it in, "that's a perfectly good vehicle. No reason to be wasteful." The help wasn't actually help, it was control disguised as generosity, leverage they could use later to influence our decisions and choices. And they wielded that leverage constantly, reminding us of their contributions as justification for why we should defer to their judgment. I started declining their offers, preferring to struggle on my own rather than accept help that came with such heavy strings. But Wesley, conditioned by years of family dynamics, kept accepting. "It's easier to just let them help," he'd say. "Otherwise they get upset." The reality that nobody saw, that the Hutchinsons certainly never acknowledged, was that most of our bills quietly came from my bank account every single month. I paid the rent, the utilities, the groceries, the insurance. My paychecks covered our daily lives, while Wesley's salary seemed to evaporate into his personal spending, car payments, and mysterious expenses he could never quite explain. I'd set up automatic payments for everything, methodically tracking every expense in a detailed spreadsheet. It was a habit from my college years when every dollar mattered. And I'd never stopped. I knew exactly where every penny went, exactly what we spent, exactly what we could afford. Wesley earned a decent salary as a sales representative, but he was terrible with money. He'd buy expensive electronics, go out for frequent lunches, make impulse purchases, and somehow always end up broke before the next paycheck. "Can you cover the electric bill this month?" he'd ask casually. "I'm a little short." It started as occasional requests and became the default arrangement. I covered expenses, and he spent his money however he wanted. Meanwhile, Barbara told everyone who would listen how she and Harold were supporting us because we were just starting out. The disconnect between reality and the Hutchinson narrative grew wider every month. I paid the down payment on our house, the one Barbara bragged about at family gatherings. $25,000 from my savings account, accumulated over years of careful saving and budgeting. The Hutchinsons had no idea because I'd never told them. Never felt the need to announce my financial contributions the way they announced every dollar they spent on us. We'd found a small 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but perfect for us. The mortgage required a 20% down payment, and Wesley had maybe $3,000 saved. I'd covered the rest without hesitation, viewing it as an investment in our future together. But at the housewarming party, I'd listened in disbelief as Barbara told guests, we helped them with the down payment, of course. They could never have afforded this place on their own. I'd opened my mouth to correct her, but Wesley had caught my eye and shaken his head slightly. "Don't make a scene," his expression said. "It's not worth it." So I'd stayed silent, letting her lie stand unchallenged. It was the first of many times I'd choose peace over truth, not realizing I was allowing Barbara to construct a false narrative that would eventually be used against me. When Wesley had a medical emergency, 2 years into our marriage, requiring surgery and a week-long hospital stay, I covered the bills that insurance didn't pay. $12,000 in out-of-pocket medical expenses, paid from my savings account while Wesley was recovering. He'd been diagnosed with a severe case of appendicitis that had progressed to peritonitis before he'd finally agreed to go to the hospital. The surgery was complicated, the recovery lengthy. Our insurance covered most of it, but the deductibles, copays, and out-of-network charges added up quickly. I'd paid every bill as it arrived, not wanting Wesley to stress about finances while he was healing. Harold had visited the hospital daily, always bringing expensive flowers or gift baskets, making a show of his concern and support. "Don't you worry about anything," he'd told Wesley. "Your mother and I are here for you. We'll make sure everything's taken care of." But they hadn't paid a single medical bill. I had. Every statement, every invoice, every payment came from my account. Yet somehow, in the family's collective memory, Harold and Barbara had helped us through that difficult time financially. When I gently corrected Barbara once, she'd looked at me with cold eyes and said, "We supported you in many ways. Money isn't everything." The lies grew bolder at family dinners and holiday gatherings. Barbara and Harold would tell elaborate stories about how they took care of us, how they'd made sure we had everything we needed, how Wesley and I would be lost without their guidance and support. They told these stories so confidently, with such conviction, that people believed them without question. Extended family members would thank Barbara and Harold for being such generous parents. Friends would comment on how lucky Wesley and I were to have such supportive in-laws. Even people who should have known better accepted the Hutchinson version of reality without questioning it. We paid for their wedding, their furniture, helped with their house, supported them through Wesley's medical crisis, Barbara would say, ticking items off on her fingers. We've given them so much. The $40,000 wedding became we paid for their wedding without acknowledging my contributions. The furniture they'd selected and purchased became we furnished their home. The down payment I'd made became we helped with their house. Wesley's medical bills I'd paid became we supported them. Every story was technically based on something real, but twisted and exaggerated until it bore little resemblance to the truth. And I stayed silent, not wanting to cause family drama, not wanting to seem ungrateful. My silence became a survival strategy. I smiled politely and let the lies pass unchallenged, choosing temporary peace over constant confrontation. Every time Barbara rewrote history, every time Harold took credit for things he hadn't done, I'd feel the urge to speak up, to correct the record. But Wesley would give me that pleading look, and I'd swallow my words. Is it really worth fighting about? He'd ask later. They're old. They remember things differently. Does it matter? It mattered to me. It mattered that the truth was being systematically erased. It mattered that I was being painted as some dependent child who couldn't function without Hutchinson's support. But I loved Wesley, or thought I did, and I wanted our marriage to work. So I chose silence, chose to let the lies stand, chose peace over truth. I attended family dinners where Barbara told stories that erased my contributions. I smiled at holiday gatherings where Harold received praise for generosity that was mostly fictional. I nodded along when extended family members commented on how much the Hutchinsons had done for us. But I also started keeping more detailed records. Every receipt, every bank statement, every payment. I saved everything, organized it carefully, documented it meticulously. I told myself it was just good financial practice, but somewhere deep down, I knew I was protecting myself. The breaking point came 3 years into our marriage when I discovered Wesley had been having an affair with a coworker. The betrayal shattered whatever remained of our relationship. But what happened next showed me exactly where the Hutchinson family's loyalties lay. When I confronted Wesley with evidence of the affair, he'd initially denied everything. Then he'd minimized it. Finally, he'd blamed me for pushing him away, for working too much, for not being the wife he needed. Within days, his parents knew everything. His version, of course, which painted him as the victim of a cold, career-obsessed wife who'd neglected his needs. Barbara called me within hours of finding out about the separation. "How could you do this to Wesley?" she demanded, not even pretending to hear my side. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" I'd tried to explain about the affair, but she'd cut me off. "Wesley says you're making that up. Wesley says you've been distant and difficult for years. Wesley says you care more about your job than your marriage." Harold backed her up completely. "We've invested so much in helping you too," he said, "and you're just going to throw it all away because of some little marital rough patch?" They blamed me, completely and absolutely. Their son was blameless in their eyes. When the court filing came, it included claims that shocked me with their audacity. The Hutchinsons were claiming they'd supported me financially throughout my marriage, that I'd contributed nothing to the household, that I was essentially a dependent who should have no claim to marital assets. The petition Wesley filed, clearly written by an attorney his parents had hired and paid for, painted a picture of me as a freeloader who'd lived off Hutchinson generosity for years. It claimed I'd made no significant financial contributions to the marriage, that I'd been supported by the respondent and his family, and that I should therefore have no claim to the house, savings, or any other marital property. "Are you kidding me?" I'd said to my attorney Veronica when she showed me the filing. "I paid for almost everything. Do you have proof?" Veronica had asked immediately, her expression serious. "Because if you do, we need to gather every piece of evidence you have. These are serious allegations, and we need to refute them completely." That's when I'd pulled out my files. 5 years of meticulously organized financial records. Bank statements showing every payment I'd made. Receipts for major purchases. Mortgage documents showing my down payment. Medical bills with my account number on the payment confirmation. Everything. Documented and organized. Instead of panicking or arguing emotionally, I channeled my anger into gathering absolutely irrefutable proof of every claim I needed to make. I spent 2 weeks working with Veronica, going through every document, creating a comprehensive financial timeline that showed exactly who had paid for what throughout our marriage. I pulled my credit card statements going back 5 years, highlighting every charge for household expenses, groceries, utilities, repairs. I gathered bank statements showing automatic payments for rent, later mortgage, insurance, and other recurring bills. I collected payment confirmations for Wesley's medical expenses, for home repairs, for property taxes. I compiled evidence of the house down payment, including the bank transfer and closing documents, showing where the money had come from. I even tracked down the vendors from our wedding, getting receipts and payment records showing which expenses I'd covered versus what Barbara and Harold had actually paid for. Veronica was impressed. "I've rarely seen documentation this thorough," she said. "This is exactly what we need." We created a payment ledger, a comprehensive document showing every significant expense over our marriage, who had paid it, and supporting documentation. The picture that emerged was stark and undeniable. I'd paid for the vast majority of our life together, while the Hutchinsons had contributed far less than they claimed. The ledger Veronica and I created was devastating in its simplicity and clarity. Every transfer was listed. Every receipt was attached. Every date was verified. It was organized chronologically, showing month by month exactly how money had flowed through our household. The document showed that over 5 years of marriage, I'd paid approximately $215,000 in household expenses, mortgage payments, medical bills, and other significant costs. Wesley's contributions totaled roughly $90,000. The Hutchinson contributions, the things Barbara claimed made me dependent on their support, totaled less than $18,000. $18,000 over 5 years. That included the portions of the wedding they'd actually paid for, the furniture they'd purchased, a few gifts of cash for birthdays and holidays, and some grocery money Barbara had occasionally provided. It didn't include the down payment on the house because they hadn't contributed to it. It didn't include Wesley's medical expenses because I'd paid those. It didn't include our daily living expenses because my salary had covered those. Their overwhelming support that justified their control over our lives amounted to less than what I paid in mortgage expenses in a single year. And now I had documentation proving it, organized in a way that even the most skeptical judge couldn't dismiss. The hearing returned to session after a brief recess, and the courtroom filled again with the same spectators who'd gasped at Barbara's initial accusations. Judge Patterson called the proceedings back to order, and I watched as people settled into their seats, clearly expecting more drama. Barbara and Harold sat confidently on their side of the courtroom, Barbara's expression serene and certain. Wesley sat beside them, still not looking at me. They had no idea what was about to happen, no clue that the narrative they'd been selling for months was about to completely unravel. Veronica stood, straightening her suit jacket, and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, we'd like to present evidence that directly contradicts the claims made by the respondent and his family regarding financial support and contributions during the marriage." Judge Patterson nodded. "Proceed." "We've prepared a comprehensive financial ledger, documenting all major expenses throughout the marriage, including who paid for what, when, and with supporting documentation for each claim." Veronica held up the thick binder containing our evidence. Barbara's confident expression flickered slightly. Harold leaned forward, frowning. Wesley finally looked up, his face uncertain. "We request permission to present this evidence to the court," Veronica continued. Judge Patterson gestured for her to approach. The tide was about to turn. Barbara launched into her grand speech again, repeating the freeloader story with even more conviction and detail than before. She'd been given the opportunity to present her case fully, and she was making the most of it. "Your Honor, my husband and I have supported this young woman for 5 years, Barbara said, her voice filled with wounded dignity. "We paid for her wedding, furnished her home, helped with her house, supported her through medical crises. We treated her like our own daughter, gave her everything she could need, and asked for nothing in return except basic gratitude and respect." She paused dramatically, pulling a tissue from her purse and dabbing at her eyes. "Instead, she's destroyed our family, she's broken our son's heart, and now she has the audacity to demand half of everything, including assets that we helped them acquire. It's unconscionable, Your Honor. She's contributed nothing but wants everything." Harold nodded solemnly beside her, playing his role perfectly. Several people in the gallery murmured sympathetically. Wesley looked down at his hands, the picture of a wronged husband. It was a compelling performance, I had to admit. Barbara was good at this, at playing the generous matriarch victimized by an ungrateful daughter-in-law. If I didn't have evidence, her story might have carried the day. Judge Patterson looked at both sides carefully and said, Let's see the financial records. I want to understand exactly who contributed what to this marriage. His tone was neutral but firm. This was the moment everything would change. Veronica approached the bench with our meticulously prepared ledger, handing copies to the judge, to Wesley's attorney, and keeping one for herself. Barbara's confident expression started to crack slightly as she watched the thick documents being distributed. "Your Honor," Veronica began, "this ledger documents every major financial transaction throughout the marriage. Page 1 begins with the wedding expenses. While Mrs. Hutchinson claims to have paid for the wedding, the actual breakdown shows something different." She directed the judge to the highlighted sections. The Hutchinsons paid for the venue and catering, totaling $28,000. However, my client paid for the rehearsal dinner, the honeymoon, the photography, the videography, the flowers, and several other expenses totaling $12,000. The wedding wasn't a gift to my client, it was a shared expense, with the Hutchinsons paying for the portions they could control and display. Judge Patterson reviewed the documents carefully, his expression unreadable. Wesley's attorney was flipping through pages, his face growing concerned. "Furthermore," Veronica continued, "the furniture Mrs. Hutchinson claims to have furnished their home with totaled approximately $4,000, all of which was furniture she selected and insisted upon." The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, began reading payments aloud from the ledger at Judge Patterson's request. Her voice was clear and steady, and with each entry, the truth became more undeniable. Monthly mortgage payment, March 2019, paid by Olivia Turner, $1,800. Monthly mortgage payment, April 2019, paid by Olivia Turner, $1,800. Property tax payment, April 2019, paid by Olivia Turner, $3,200. The list continued, month after month, payment after payment. My name appeared over and over again. Wesley's name appeared occasionally. The Hutchinson names appeared rarely. Electric bill, May 2019, paid by Olivia Turner, $168. Water bill, May 2019, paid by Olivia Turner, $47. Internet and cable, May 2019, paid by Olivia Turner, $139. Patricia's voice became almost rhythmic, the repetition making the pattern impossible to ignore. Hospital bill for Wesley Hutchinson appendectomy, June 2020, paid by Olivia Turner, $4,300. Follow-up care expenses, July 2020, paid by Olivia Turner, $2,800. Medical equipment rental, July 2020, paid by Olivia Turner, $600. Barbara's face had gone completely pale. Harold was leaning forward, trying to read the documents from across the room. Wesley looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. The shift in the courtroom was palpable and immediate. Whispers spread through the gallery like wildfire. People who'd been looking at me with judgment and suspicion minutes earlier were now staring at the Hutchinsons with confusion and growing disapproval. My mother-in-law's face had drained of all color, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. She looked at Harold desperately, but he was staring at the documents in front of Wesley's attorney, his expression stunned. Patricia the clerk continued reading. Home repair expenses, August 2020, paid by Olivia Turner, $7,500. Roof replacement, September 2020, paid by Olivia Turner, $12,000. HVAC system replacement, November 2020, paid by Olivia Turner, $8,000. Judge Patterson held up his hand, stopping the reading. "I think we've heard enough to establish the pattern," he said. He looked directly at Barbara and Harold. "Mrs. Hutchinson, you testified under oath that you supported this young woman financially throughout her marriage. You claimed she contributed nothing and lived off your generosity, yet this ledger tells a very different story." Barbara tried to speak. "Your Honor, we helped in other ways." "This is documented financial evidence," Judge Patterson interrupted firmly. "Bank statements, payment confirmations, receipts. All verified and cross-referenced. This is irrefutable." The truth was exposed in devastating detail. The Hutchinsons' so-called overwhelming support totaled $17,800 over 5 years of marriage. My documented contributions totaled $214,600. The disparity was stark and undeniable. Veronica presented the summary page, showing the totals side by side. Your Honor, the evidence shows that my client paid for approximately 72% of all household expenses throughout this marriage. Wesley Hutchinson contributed approximately 24%. His parents contributed approximately 4%. She paused, letting those numbers sink in. Yet they've characterized my client as a dependent freeloader who lived off their generosity. The evidence proves this is categorically false. In fact, the opposite is true. My client was the primary financial supporter of this household, while the Hutchinsons took credit for her contributions. Judge Patterson reviewed the summary carefully. This is quite comprehensive, he said. Miss Turner, did you maintain these records specifically in anticipation of divorce proceedings? I spoke for the first time during the hearing, my voice steady. No, Your Honor. I maintained them because I'm an accountant. Detailed financial record keeping is both my professional responsibility and personal habit. I never anticipated needing them for these purposes. But you kept every receipt, every bank statement, every payment confirmation for 5 years? Yes, Your Honor. I keep 7 years of financial records as standard practice. Judge Patterson's ruling was swift, decisive, and completely in my favor. He'd seen enough evidence and heard enough testimony to reach a clear conclusion. Based on the evidence presented, Judge Patterson began, his voice firm and authoritative. The court finds that Miss Turner was the primary financial contributor to this marriage. The claims made by the respondent and his family regarding financial dependency are not supported by evidence and appear to be categorically false. Barbara made a small sound of protest, but the judge continued without acknowledging her. Furthermore, the court notes with concern that testimony was given under oath, claiming Miss Turner contributed nothing financially, when the evidence clearly shows she contributed the vast majority of resources to the household. This court takes seriously the responsibility of witnesses to provide truthful testimony. He looked directly at Barbara and Harold. The court finds that marital assets should be divided according to actual contributions, not fictional narratives. Miss Turner is entitled to her equitable share of all marital property, including the house, savings, and other assets acquired during the marriage. Wesley's attorney tried to object, but Judge Patterson held up his hand. The evidence is clear and comprehensive. The ruling stands. Additionally, given the baseless nature of the claims made against Miss Turner, the court orders that she be reimbursed for her legal fees associated with defending against these false allegations. The consequences extended beyond just the favorable ruling. Barbara and Harold were ordered to repay funds they'd claimed as loans, but had actually been gifts, and to cover my substantial legal costs. Judge Patterson had been particularly stern about this aspect of his ruling. The court finds that Mr. and Mrs. Hutchinson actively participated in creating false financial claims against Miss Turner, he said. They provided testimony under oath that was contradicted by comprehensive documentary evidence. Therefore, the court orders them to pay Miss Turner's legal fees in full, totaling $18,500. Barbara actually gasped at that number. Harold's face turned an alarming shade of red. Furthermore, Judge Patterson continued, the court notes that several payments the Hutchinsons characterized as support were actually loans that were repaid by Miss Turner, but continued to be referenced as gifts. The documentation shows clear repayment. The Hutchinsons are ordered to provide written acknowledgement of these repayments and cease making claims of financial support that have been proven false. Wesley's attorney requested time to review the evidence further, but Judge Patterson denied the request. The evidence is comprehensive and clear. There's nothing to review. The ruling is final. As we left the courtroom, people who'd been whispering sympathetically about the Hutchinsons earlier now avoided eye contact with them. The truth had been exposed publicly and irrefutably. I walked out of that courtroom lighter, stronger, and finally free from the web of lies the Hutchinsons had been spinning for years. The divorce was finalized 3 months later, with terms exactly as Judge Patterson had outlined. I received my equitable share of all marital assets, which given my contributions meant significantly more than half. The house was sold, and after the mortgage was paid off, I received 72% of the proceeds. matching exactly my percentage of financial contribution to the household. Wesley received his 24%, and the Hutchinsons received nothing, because they'd contributed nothing to the actual mortgage despite their claims. I used my portion to buy a small condo downtown, a place that was entirely mine, with no Hutchinson influence or control. My legal fees were paid in full by Barbara and Harold, as ordered. They'd tried to appeal the ruling, but their attorney had advised them they had no grounds given the comprehensive evidence. The Hutchinson family stopped speaking to me entirely, which was the greatest gift they could have given me. No more controlling phone calls, no more manipulative dinner invitations, no more lies told at family gatherings. I was free. My career flourished without the constant drain of their drama and demands. I got promoted 6 months after the divorce. I reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. I rediscovered who I was without the weight of Hutchinson expectations crushing me. And every time I looked at my meticulously organized financial records, I smiled. Because the truth, properly documented, had set me free.